Hey, what's up? So, in the last video, I told you that in order to turn your business into a movement that attracts clients effortlessly, you had to stand for a core belief. Remember that? That was the S. And I also showed you how every powerful movement in history started with a single powerful core belief that people could rally around. Remember that? So before we even move to the next letter in the shift formula, I know many of you are excited for that, but we're still in that S. We need to pause here for a second. Because here's the thing. If your core belief is not strong enough to lead a movement, you'll find yourself right back in the cycle of chasing, convincing, and selling. And trust me, that is not what we're building here. So before we move forward, here's what we're going to do. I want to pause here and to check to make sure that your belief is powerful enough to attract clients on autopilot every single week. That's why I created something called the belief test. It's pretty much a filter, okay? If you actually did the homework from the last session, the last video, we're going to put that through a filter here today. This is a filter that every core belief must pass if it's going to fuel a movement. Because listen, if your belief does not pass the belief test, your movement will not catch fire. So let me break it down real quick, right? The word belief is what we're going off of right here. The B stands for break the norm. The E stands for exclude the masses. The L stands for lead to identity. The I stands for inspire action. The E is expose the enemy. And the F is fuel a future. And today we're going to unpack the first letter of that, okay? Let's talk about the B, break the norm. And to be honest, if your belief that you wrote down for your homework assignment sounds like everyone else's, it will not work, okay? You cannot lead a movement if your belief sounds like anyone else's. That is why the first rule of the belief test is this. Your belief must break the norm. Because movements are not built on agreement, they're built on disruption. They challenge the status quo. They go against what is normally accepted. They challenge what everyone just assumes is the way it is. Let me give you a real world example. When Steve Jobs came back into Apple, I think it was about the late 90s, he looked at the computer world, which was filled with a whole bunch of beige computers, because that's what it was at that time. There were all these beige computers. And they were filled with buttons, with manuals, and with complexity. But here's the thing. The norm back then was that computers were for engineers, not everyday people like it is today. They were cold, they were technical, they were clunky. Engineers used them to run code, to crunch data, to perform complex tasks, but they did not use them to create. But guess what? Steve Jobs, being the visionary that he was, saw something that no one else did. He asked this question: what if a computer didn't feel like a machine, but actually felt like a work of art? What if it was designed for the creator and not the coder? At the time, that was extremely radical because computers were not designed for creatives or artists or even designers. At that time, they came with a 200-page manual and just assumed that you were an expert. But Steve Jobs, he stripped away the manual and he started to focus on simplicity, on emotion, and on elegance. He is responsible for bringing design into tech. And wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden, Apple was no longer competing, they were leading the industry. Steve Jobs broke the norm by redefining who technology was for. Today, photographers, graphic designers, website designers, and a multitude of creatives use Apple products, including myself, because Apple became synonymous with creatives. You see, that's what breaking the norm looks like. Now it is your turn. We're going to do a drill that I call draw the line drill. I want you to grab a sheet of paper and draw a line directly down the middle. On the left side, I want you to write down something from your industry that everyone seems to believe, but you know is dead wrong. And then on the right side of it, I want you to write what you believe instead. Here's an example from my industry. In my industry, everyone believes that in order to get sales, you have to sell. I believe that is completely wrong because if someone needs to be convinced, that means they're resistant. And if they're resistant, why are you even chasing them? Because truthfully, that means you don't have a sales problem, you have a belief problem. The thing I believe is that you don't need to sell harder. What you need to do is to shift beliefs. Because when you shift somebody's belief, you don't need to convince them of anything. They have convinced themselves. You see, the thing is, the more you try to sell, the more resistance that you create. But when your belief breaks the norm and they resonate, oh my goodness, that's when people move. That's when people take action, okay? It has to break the norm and it has to resonate with people, okay? Remember the history of movements we talked about in the last video? How when all these powerful movements in history, right? They didn't have to sell people on those beliefs. People resonated with them. Remember that? So here's what I want you to do next. Go ahead and do the draw the line drill and think about what your industry readily accepts and what you reject. Okay? You got to have both of those. And right there, that's where your movement begins. Okay? Think about what your industry readily accepts that you reject. That's where your movement begins. Because remember this one thing, movements do not start with the crowd. They start with the courage to break away from it. So I will see you in the next video where we'll talk about the next filter in the belief test, which is the E. Does it exclude the masses? Let's go.